I'm Ashton Addison from Blockwest Capital for InvestmentPitch Media and the Crypto Coin Show. And today on Blockchain Interviews with Max Kordek, the CEO and co-founder of Lisk. Max, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for taking the time to come on today.
Hey Ashton, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
You're very welcome. I'm excited to dive into the world of Lisk protocol. I know your team has been working on this for a long time. There's a lot to it, and there's some great applications that are coming out, and I'm really excited to dive into the details. And I would love for you to kick it off for us by just giving us a little bit of information about Lisk, the protocol, and some of the solutions that your team is driving into the cryptocurrency space, and then we can dive into the details.
Yeah, sure. So Lisk is, I would say, an OG project of the crypto scene. We're around since 2016, but had some starting problems. So I would say we're actually around since 2019. That's when we hired our research team and had or introduced our research-led effort. At Lisk, we basically have two products. You could say we have the SDK and we have the platform. And the SDK is targeted towards developers to make it easy to build their own blockchain applications. So similar like a D app, but which is natively built on its own blockchain. And the platform itself then would have the goal to combine these various blockchain applications with each other's through a common interoperability protocol. We always thought, okay, there's so many JavaScript developers out there, we have to somehow target that specific group of developers. And that's why all our tools are built completely in JavaScript. And we think experimentation is extremely important. So that's why we built this SDK to let developers experiment with blockchain technology. And I think out of these experiments, eventually startups occur. We thought like, okay, if we give them the tools, they're all going to build their own blockchains. They're all going to build their own solutions. However, we feel like a connected ecosystem is so much more powerful. And that's why we also decided to build this platform. We call it a blockchain application platform, which then connects all these blockchain applications with each others in order to leverage their own or each of their utility aspects, and which allows for stronger or more powerful combinations on the platform.
Definitely great introduction, Max. And yeah, it's interesting to see Lisk. I've been following Lisk since 2016, back when you first started it. And boy, the industry has changed dramatically. I'm curious if you have a perspective on the industry growth and how Lisk grew with that, starting the protocol back when there wasn't a lot of DeFi, there wasn't a lot of capital injection into the industry, nor NFTs. And did that growth of the industry in a certain direction play a role within Lisk growing or having to make any changes?
Yeah, definitely. So when we started in 2016, venture capitalists really didn't discover blockchain yet. And so we had more like a grassroots effort, just retail investors doing our ICO. And unfortunately, for the first 2 years, we were struggling a bit because it took us just 1 year to find a jurisdiction in which we can create a legal entity. Now we are based in Switzerland. However, then what we saw is that over the years, the space or the industry itself got more professional. And that means more capital flowed into it and more venture capitalists were interested suddenly. And that's how other projects, I think, came around, heavily supported by venture capitalists like Polkadot or Cosmos, which then have maybe the same goal as Lisk, but with a different community or with a different background. Back in the day, DeFi was not a term, GameFi was not a term. The different ideas of tokens, NFTs, decentralized exchanges, they all existed, of course, already, but it was by no means as big as it is today. And today we really have to find a niche or a unique value proposition for our platform to really stand out. And one of the aspects is just the ease of use and the accessibility with JavaScript and just a heavy focus on developer and user experience. But overall, the industry just changed to become very saturated. There's so many smart contract platforms, so many blockchain application platforms out there. And I think that's why it's so important to introduce interoperability to all of these platforms, because well, that's just how the world is. There will always be a multitude of options available, no matter where you're looking. And that's where it's just important to just leverage the technology by connecting the different ecosystems with each others, and that's exactly what we're now doing. That was actually still part of our original vision for Lisk itself, but just encapsulated within the Lisk ecosystem. But now we added one roadmap phase where we are also branching out to other platforms, where we are getting connected to the Ethereum ecosystem, to the Polkadot ecosystem, and so on. And I think that's a crucial step for the future, because you cannot have these island solutions. You cannot just yesterday I talked with some people who are pretty new to crypto, and they held like multiple cryptocurrencies on the exchange. And I told them, hey, you should get them off the exchange. But then they were asking me, okay, but which wallet should I get? And they had like 20 currencies and they all needed different wallets, and that's not the way to go. So I think like a connected ecosystem where you have one place to enter is really crucial. And that's where we are more and more heading towards. I'm currently like drafting up a new vision for Lisk with my partner, because we were still working on the original one, but this Lisk interoperability, it's coming now. It's fully researched, everything is published. It's over 20 research papers, and it's now in the implementation phase. So it's time for something new, for something fresh, which we're going to reveal next year. So yeah, a lot is moving, a lot is changing, and our original vision is, of course, by far outdated, and that's why this refresh. But it's super interesting how the industry overall developed over the years.
Definitely. Very exciting to hear that. I'm looking forward to that new paper. And you were speaking about JavaScript and how it's used to develop on Lisk. And I know JavaScript is one of the most popular programming languages in the world, which is obviously going to help with developers. But there are so many smart contracting protocols to develop on that it can be a hard choice. And I'm curious if that's helped with bringing developers to Lisk, and also if there are other incentivizations or programs to help developers move and develop applications on Lisk.
Yeah, I would say JavaScript definitely helps. It's our biggest unique selling point, or part of our value proposition for developers. However, of course, you really have to put a big focus on user and developer experience as well. The language itself doesn't cut it there. But I always like to say one example, like if a company wants to do something with blockchain technology and they're looking to hire a team, mostly they look to first hire internally. And it's probably more likely that a company has JavaScript developers already in there, in contrast to, let's say, Solidity developers. Also, a JavaScript developer is much, much cheaper than a Solidity developer, because like I see now rates like reaching into the thousands for 1 day of work for a Solidity developer. So that's already becoming quite crazy. So we have quite some advantages with that. However, really the whole blockchain industry is so saturated by now with different, like you said, smart contract platforms or blockchain application platforms like ours, that this alone is not enough. We really have to put in proper incentivization programs in place in order to attract developers. And in our case, we have every quarter one hackathon. We call it Hack on Lisk, in which we are giving prizes. The first one was around $33,000 in prizes. The second one now, which is currently running, has a total prize money of $60,000 US. So it's quite high prices in order to attract developers into our ecosystem to just play around with the Lisk SDK. And next to that, we are also having a grant program, how we call it, in which we're incentivizing developers with around $65,000 to build a blockchain application on the Lisk blockchain application platform. And currently we have 2 applicants from the first wave. The second wave is currently running, so we're evaluating the applications there. And it's pretty interesting to see that people from all over the world are either participating in the hackathon or applying for the grant program and really want to join Lisk because they believe into the protocol and they believe into the project, the team, the ecosystem. But in most cases, I think It's that they saw it's JavaScript and they played around with it, saw that the developer experience is like so easy, and I would say dramatically more easy than from our competitors. And that's why they take the next step. They then participate in Hack on Lisk, and then they're applying for the grant program, join our community on Discord, and I hope then in the coming months and years really create a startup, a company around that, and well, become part of the ecosystem.
Very cool. And yeah, it's great to hear that you have the hackathon and that developers are incentivized and there's actually grant money to develop on Lisk. So that's great to be supporting the ecosystem through that. And I'm also curious on, with the dApps being developed on Lisk, how does the Lisk network token play a role in the ecosystem? And is it used for the development, or are there other functionalities of the Lisk network token?
Yeah, so I mentioned very briefly our roadmap before. So currently we are in the Sapphire roadmap phase, and that's where we are implementing our interoperability protocol, which allows then basically all these different blockchain applications living on their own native blockchain to communicate with each others and to send, let's say, data, information to each others, but also tokens. And the next phase of our roadmap is called Diamond. And that's where we are branching out to other ecosystems like Ethereum, Polkadot, Cosmos, and so on, where you can do the same thing. And the tokens utility aspect is, on the one side, of course, living on the Lisk blockchain and being part of the governance of it. So we are based on delegated proof of stake, where you can vote in validators or delegates, or we call them, in order to, well, secure the blockchain and generate new blocks. And that's something you do with your LSK stake. You can also, well, use it, of course, for transaction fees. That's a second use case or second utility on the Lisk blockchain itself. However, the most interesting aspect now comes into play with the different blockchain applications. So, of course, the developer has complete freedom in how they design their blockchain application. They can either choose to use the LSK token for their fees on their blockchain app, or they can create a new token. And what we really want to get developers into is to just use the LSK token, because it's very complicated to have your own token. You have to, well, legally take care of many, many things. Like we, as a Swiss foundation, are being audited every year on the same level as a bank. So that's quite a big entry barrier, I would say, to have a token. But also you really have to put a lot of effort and money into like creating a market for it, you know. That's not easy. So we really want to motivate our developers in the ecosystem to not create their own token, to use the LSK tokens for the fees. And that means the third utility aspect then is to pay for all these transaction fees inside all these blockchain applications. On top of that, you will also always require LSK token in order to pay the fee to go from one blockchain to another blockchain. So for the interoperability protocol, you need it as well. And then, of course, like with DeFi, people are going to build use cases where you need to lock up your tokens as collateral or to provide liquidity. That, of course, as well. But essentially, like this is the main functionality for the LSK tokens to pay for these transaction fees on the Lisk blockchain and all the blockchain applications, and for the interoperability aspect.
Great, thanks, Max. And yeah, you keep touching on the interoperability. It seems like that's obviously going to be something huge for Lisk moving forward. And I'm curious, in your future roadmap, if you can just touch on the major highlights of what's the next big thing, you know, between the end of the year or maybe it's in the starting of 2022, that are the next big things to come out for Lisk.
Yeah, so we're currently, I think, in the middle of a hole because we just released Lisk version 3, which we worked on for 3 years. And it was a substantial update. So essentially every part of the protocol was touched. We introduced a new fee system, a new ID or address system, a new consensus algorithm, a new BFT consensus algorithm as well, in order to have block finalization, which means after 20 minutes approximately, it's 100% certain that the transaction is confirmed, which is important if you do cross-chain transactions. We introduced a new multi-signature scheme, like so many things, okay? And with that, like the biggest milestone so far is just behind us. However, we didn't stop. In May, we introduced our interoperability protocol with over 20 research papers, and we're now implementing that. We foresee that we can implement it by next year. And then, of course, this very long, let's say, phase of Q&A or testing begins. This is always the most challenging period, not the implementation, but actually the testing of the implementation. And that's the next year. And I think that's the next biggest milestone. And that will be the conclusion of the ICO promise my partner Oliver Beddoes and myself gave back in 2016. That's essentially where we say after 7 years, then we did it. We delivered what we promised 7 years ago, you know?
Yeah.
And that's exactly why we're currently like sketching out a new vision, something bigger, something grander, because the industry developed forward, and we just, we're not competitive enough anymore with the 6-year-old vision, of course. So that's where we're currently in. However, interoperability is the next big thing within Lisk, and then the next big thing after that is interoperability towards other ecosystems. But that's mostly on the protocol side of thing. And I think like that's becoming more and more secondary. Cardano, Polkadot, Cosmos, Ethereum, they all have great protocols, you know? And I think what's now becoming more and more important is the ecosystem around. On the one side, how easy it is for new users to be onboarded into your ecosystem. That's where maybe your website, your wallets play a big role. The number of exchanges where they can acquire the tokens plays a role, but also the community itself, which is always there as a helping hand if new joiners have questions. So that's becoming very important. And then also the number of blockchain applications being built within the ecosystem, because what we see is that each blockchain application is somewhat of a multiplier. They all attract their own little community, and of course they join the Lisk community as well. So these factors become more and more important. So not really what's the next big thing for our protocol, but rather what's the next big thing for our ecosystem overall. And that's, I think becomes very interesting next year, because we just launched the SDK into production with the hackathons. We're just starting to attract developers into our ecosystem. With the grant, we're just incentivizing them to build something within our ecosystem. So we're just at the very beginning. And that means for entrepreneurs and developers, it's like cherry picking. They can just cherry pick like the best use cases of other ecosystems and port them over into ours. And well, they're going to be like the first movers and will have big advantages over their competitions then within our ecosystem. So it's really an interesting time, and I think it's the perfect moment for JavaScript developers to join us and to play around, but also to build something substantial with our SDK.
Definitely. It does sound like a great time. And if there are developers or just users that are looking to look into the apps built, look into the DeFi, the staking, start developing on Lisk, what's the best way for the community to get involved in Lisk and to learn more?
Yeah, it's super simple. Basically, everyone just has to, take a look at our website. If they're a developer, definitely just head to our documentation. So lisk.com/documentation. There you're going to find everything you need to know to use our Lisk SDK. Everyone else, I would suggest also to join, but developers, of course, as well, to join our Discord server. That's where our main community is living, essentially. And they always can help you out with questions. So that would be the starting point, I guess, the documentation and our Discord server. And then it's about installing our wallets, acquiring a tiny amount of tokens to play around with the network. It's insanely cheap now, so you can use everything and spend like 10 cents. I think that would be a good start.
Great. Thank you so much, Max. I will leave those links as well in the description box below. All the best with the upcoming roadmap for Lisk. I'm excited to see how it plays out, and let's follow up in the near future.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to be back on the show again.